Okay, so just to recap what we did with the Google 3D warehouse, which I think Chris suggested, right? Like, so Google has a ton of 3D models stored that they use for the maps, Google Maps, in their SketchUp introductory 3D program. So here's one, and when you click on it, it gives you the option of SketchUp format, Google Earth format, or Collada. Now Collada is an open source 3D file format. We can't use that necessarily in After Effects or in Maya directly, but, okay, and I already downloaded it here.
Recording, right?
Yeah, I'm recording. I already deleted the download. Here, let's just download it again so we can show you the process. Here it is, and here is the model. DAE. So now we need to get this into a format that we can use. And do I have MeshLab linked here? Okay, I will put it in the wiki. MeshLab is a really invaluable program for converting, fixing, editing 3D object files. It is really, really a priceless utility for this kind of thing. So what I'm going to do here is I'll start up MeshLab, and I'm going to import Command I. Where is that? Oh, downloads. There we go. Model, warehouse model. And generally you can just go with whatever it says. And here's the Coliseum with the textures and everything. So, file, export mesh as, object file, desktop, save, show, replace. Usually you can just say OK to all those defaults. And we have an object file. And this we can bring into After Effects. Here, we already got this here.
Why are there files, files?
Oh, what was that?
Why are there files? Does it accept? Like, does it accept?
Oh, well, other. The Plexus plugin in After Effects, which you apply to a solid here. I'm going to do it from scratch. So I'm going to make a new composition. Command N, or click this button. I'm going to make a new solid. Command Y, or layer new solid. And then effect Plexus. And this, let's is kind of complicated. Add object obj, import obj, and then let's get that file and there it is. Under transform, you can scale it up, change the position.
Is MeshLab free or is it?
MeshLab is free. So I haven't shown Plexus much because it's $200. It's really good, and just for, and you know, there's a ton of After Effects projects, and Greg were talking about this over the break, that are really just about convenience. Like there's Element 3D, which is a new plugin, and it's like $140, and it lets you render things inside After Effects quickly. Like there's a whole ecosystem of stuff that serves the motion graphics industry. And when you have things like Maya and Blender that are free, or like Cinema 4D, I think it's something like $300. You know, so a couple of After Effects plugins that work with 3D graphics together are the cost of an entire full-feature 3D program. So at some point, I think you just have to say, okay, I'm just going to share camera data and move back and forth. You know, which we'll continue to cover ways to do that here. Also, all the things we're doing with Maya and JavaScript, you can do with with After Effects and JavaScript. You can do with Maya and Python. Like anytime we write a script, all these tactics of using that data class and writing out these JSX scripts. You can, if you want to dive into Maya, you can generate a Python script the same way. You don't have to learn the fine detail, or finer points of scripting in Python or JavaScript. You can just use your processing app and write keyframe, 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 just as we're doing. Yeah.
Can you, you were mentioning, I think a little bit for the break, sort of the process of figuring out reading XML and JSON into After Effects.
Mm-hmm.
Can you, and obviously there are sort of there's evidence of you learning, figuring that out.
Mhm.
And that's can you? I would really like to
Mhm.
understand that, or for you,
Okay.
for you to explain that. I don't know if that's
Sure.
something
We can go into more detail with this because I want to spend a whole class looking at how we build these panels, these interfaces. Where did I put this?
Sorry, which interface? The
Well,
way
this is
you
because it deserves a whole class to itself because it's a lot of material. But I can show you to the parts. Okay, so we have this, the connect to pin script, right, with these buttons, and here is here's where we actually create the buttons and link functions to them. And it's the ones that are import, where are we? Import 2D data. Yeah, import mocap 2D and import mocap 3D. That's where we use the XML and JSON import functions here. Right? So click on the button, it opens a file dialog box, we choose a file, then it goes to the file and finds stuff. This is the code for opening up a file. And then this is a file. This is for looking at the extension on the file. And you should all, if you don't already, you should all put extensions on your file names, right? Does anyone not do that? Right, because it's both you, the human looking at the file, and the computer can know what those are. Not doing it is more a holdover from OS 9, so that's kind of dying out.
Yeah, there's a way, file, command file in the terminal.
Okay.
It guesses what kind of file
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at, not based on the extension.
But by metadata, yeah. OS, right?
Unix. Any kind of Unix, like Linux and so on, as well as OS 10.
Interesting. I mean, but it wouldn't work in a case like this, right? Like where
JSON is
Yeah.
gets.
really
Yeah.
interesting, neat. So this anyway, just looking at the extension, and either running a file function to load the XML or load the JSON, and then this bangs through that whole XML file and loads gets your joint coordinates from that. Else, if it's JSON, it uses a different method to grab and the point, the difference between XML and JSON, but it's the whole VHS versus Betamax thing, right? It's not really who's technically superior, it's what has the most community support. There's a famous urban legend, I don't know if this is true or not, that what actually drove VHS, which was the inferior format, video cassette format, to victory in the last instance, was offering free equipment to porn producers if they worked at VHS and not in Betamax, and that was what. So it's not always the most technically worthy standard that wins. Although I do think that JSON will continue growing, but I'm just saying subjectively from my experience, I found this code in about half an hour, and I put this together over a couple days, just because it wasn't obvious out there how to do that. And once again, also looking at film and motion graphics and sources. Whereas I'll bet that's so neat. Those of you with a background in web design are in a position to really do amazing things, I think, going forward. Because I'll bet you, as a web designer, which I really am not, you'd have a lot more resources at your disposal for quickly looking up solutions to JavaScript problems. But yeah, and that's what those are. And you see it ends with that command that you see throughout those scripts, set value at time, which is write a keyframe, write a keyframe. If you look at the script that was generated by the little OSC app we just looked at, oops. Again, write a keyframe, write a keyframe, write a keyframe. You can even do that keyframe running thing. Scripts run. You could even say, here's one that does the classic bouncing ball exercise. Did you do that in processing, like in ICM, where you made a ball bounce around? So this is done purely in JavaScript. That wasn't created in processing and written. And there's not really much reason to do it this way because you can't see the output, right? You have to continually render it and test it. As what's so neat about processing, you can build real-time sketches and then record the results in keyframes. But here, this is the old, you have a value for speed, and you multiply it by -1 when it hits the wall. Yeah?
What happens to the, like when you generate images in JSS,
Mm-hmm.
what happens to the keyframe? It seems like it doesn't show up on your After Effects panel, but your object is moving according to what the script is telling you.
That's a good question. You're looking at this with the layer completely collapsed. They call it twirling when you burrow through these different property layers and get to, and look, there are the position keyframes we wrote. Right? It's easier, a lot easier, I find, to use the shortcut keys. There's P. It takes us right to position. I strongly recommend in After Effects specifically, but in animation programs in general, which tend to be littered with distractions, to learn those shortcut keys. Yeah. Yeah. Basically, everywhere you see set value at time, set value by itself just changes the property for all time. Set value at time writes a keyframe. So every time you see that, a keyframe is being written somewhere.
So the most valuable keyframe shortcut you need to know is U. And every time, that means that when you press U on a layer, it shows you every keyframe in that layer. So you have multiple
Right.
effects that have keyframes. It'll show them all stacked and on top of each other, so you'll know when they're timed together. Very useful.
That's actually, you're right. I should stress that more. U is show all modified properties. If you have a layer that's all closed, you want to know what you did to it, hit U. What would U twice
U
do?
does all.
What does U twice do?
U makes the keyframes appear. U twice makes all of the modified properties appear.
Huh. Let's set some keyframes and see what happens. U. Okay. U.
No, modify property without setting the keyframe.
Okay.
So like rotate, yeah.
There it is. Cool.
And E does all the effects.
Right. Neat. So time we have left. How many of you have done rotoscoping before? Okay, cool. So we look at that really quickly. And that's what I'd like you guys to do for next time, is to come up with an experiment that involves drawing. You can interpret this any way you like. It doesn't have to be what we're about to look at, drawing over live action. But here it is. You don't have to write these all down now. I went and put them all on the syllabus. So grab some live action footage, and then, or grab some live control data. This doesn't necessarily have to be going and filming something and then drawing over it, although it can be. What we just did with the Wiimote counts. Any use of live data. You could try compositing. You could try replacing an actor in a scene with something drawn. Some of you have experimented with some of this stuff already. If you don't want to experiment with a match move, right? That was how we analyzed a scene with a moving camera. Just lock the camera down. That's how they did most special effects before motion-controlled cameras, right? It's kind of a confusing bunch of techniques, right? There's motion tracking or match move, which is motion tracking or match move, which is figuring out where objects are in the scene or where the camera is in the scene. Motion capture, which was which is figuring out how a performer is moving. And then there's motion control, which is the older technology, which is a robot camera with recorded. So that was how the only way before computer vision you could match a composite element in a moving scene was if you had a robot camera and you knew all the coordinates that it was at. Whereas now we can analyze any piece of video, or nearly any piece of video, and then figure out where the camera was after the fact. If you don't want to deal with that and you don't have a robot arm, it'd be interesting if someone improvised that. I mean, it'd be a hell of a lot cheaper to build something like that now than in the 80s. If you don't want to mess with either of those approaches, just would say.
You mean motion control?
Yeah, it would be a lot easier to build a motion control with an Arduino at this point, right? And especially doing crazy things like right up into the 90s for movies like Gladiator, they were building miniature cameras, like because it was how they did that, like some of their handheld battle scenes. Put an accelerometer on the back of a handheld real camera, record its motion, put it into a miniature camera in a model, and then composite the two together so you have the live actors against the model backdrop and the cameras moving in sync. Obviously, like today, for most purposes, you would do this with a match move, right? You would just film and then work out later in using computer vision where the camera was. But I mean, you can do neat stuff with miniature cameras driving through models anyway. A ton of effects in the Lord of the Rings trilogy were done that way. I'm saying it's an interesting thing to do if you're mechanically inclined, but if you don't want to do any of that, just lock the camera down, put it on a tripod. Then it doesn't move. You can cut and paste anything in the shot. To look really briefly at the process of rotoscoping, the easiest way to do it, I don't have my Wacom with me, which would have been handy. I'm going to double click to import, and then on the desktop here, that same clip we've been using. So one of the easiest ways to draw on the screen here, and let's just use this. I'm going to Command-Shift-D to split. Take this back here. And then Command-K to get to the comp settings and say 3 seconds. You can also say composition trim comp to work area. That's another way to resize it. Like this. After Effects has a paint feature. It's moved to the brush. You need to take the double-click this to bring it into a layer. And you can simply paint strokes. So you'll notice that you have different brush controls. If I was using a Wacom, then I would have pressure sensitivity, brush options. Is that new? Where's the rotor brush?
Yeah, you want the rotor brush, yeah. Keep going.
Okay, okay. So this is just drawing strokes over the film. So where is the rotor brush?
Second to last up there. You see the man right there.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So this will snap to an area, but that's for creating masks, isn't it?
Don't you want a rotor?
Let's see. Propagation. Nice.
Yeah, so if you wanted to get it really exact, you zoom in and then you tell it this is good, this is bad.
Right.
You don't even have to do it like that.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, you make like a slash of the area and it does an estimation. And it's really, just like that. Yeah. And then shift to add. Yep.
That is impressive. Have they worked on this for CS6 or?
It's CS5.
CS5.
Came out.
Neat.
It's even better now.
So how do you turn this into
So
a
you gotta
mask? Yeah.
So after now, you see how you went and it propagated? It
Right.
actually calculated each frame based on
Right.
the guide that you gave it. And then after you do that, you have to actually create the keyframes. And there's a freeze button that I don't see. It's supposed to be underneath your thing there. It's supposed to say freeze.
You should extend the monitor to the right.
It's on here? Oh, here,
Yeah,
beautiful.
maybe you had to go. Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. There we
Yeah,
go.
you freeze.
Okay, so freeze.
And now it's going to create the mask. Now when you go
Okay.
back into the comp, there's the map for that. object. And you see how you start off
Right.
off here. So the goal is you find a frame that has your object in it, the thing that you want to isolate. You did exactly what you did. You just did the green colored marker over the areas that you wanted. And if you wanted to get it really fine, you press Alt and it turns red and you remove the things in it. And then you go like 5 frames over or 5 frames back and it calculates the things in between. It actually makes it in between. So these are just like estimations.
So how
After you do this over
right.
time, you freeze it,
Right.
and it gives you the actual keyframes at each frame of that mask.
How do you use this now that it's been
So
drawn
you go
across
back
the
into your comp,
Right.
and right now you're now like comparing the
Right.
layer view,
Okay. Ah.
and there it is.
Okay. And there it is. Refine that, and then you can use the alpha for something else.
So you can also refine. You see how it's like bumpy,
Mhm.
smooth.
Right, that's
feather
That's the same as the refine matte effect.
in Photoshop.
That's actually really you used to have the matte choker, which could try and round off the edges of a mask, but refine matte is much more sophisticated. You can see the feathering there. So yeah, this would be a very tricky shot. Like this is, you definitely need lots of manual cleanup still. This is neat. This is all new to me. It strikes me as kind of like the fire and forget motion tracker we looked at, where when it works, it's really perfect, but then in some types of material, it needs a lot of human guidance if you really wanted to isolate the cyclist.
And the cyclist is hard because you can imagine the spokes of the wheel have holes. So
Right.
if you really want it to look like that guy's up there, you would have to take out those holes in the wheel.
But this is something, but this is neat. Like you could duplicate this, and duplicating layers over themselves it's always an interesting way to go. So here's a whole copy. Here is the roto copy. And then track matte is always interesting in these sorts of situations. We want to take a solid color, or this could be any kind of new material, and say alpha matte. Well, now I have this guy.
Yeah, that's how they do the iTunes, iPod,
Right.
commercial.
Change this to red, and now he's got this sort of weird glowing red patch following. Or this could be anything. This could be another piece of video footage. This could be. And once again, like I think it's really good in when you're just starting out to don't worry about things looking neat. Don't worry about doing photorealistic compositing or what's pretty. Like make things ugly, break things. I really enjoyed. I think some of the coolest stuff we've seen in the work you've shown so far are the ones where you just sort of made random stuff that kind of stretched out. So this is neat. Another very simple thing to do, not in After Effects at all, is to simply render things out in frames. If you just say multi-machine sequence, this should get you in the right direction. There's all kinds of nice stuff when you when you render things out as a folder full of frames. You can bring them into processing. You can do stuff with them there, because processing works in frames. Does everyone know how to bring a bunch of frames into processing? Does everyone know what you do? Okay, we'll look at that. Gotta make some tough decisions here. Okay, we can look at that really briefly. It's an array, right? You make an array of P images, and then you can control them. All kinds of neat stuff becomes possible when you.
So you can support like a TGA sequence or something?
That's what I'm doing right now. Doing right now here.
TGA sequence.
Yep.
And you can use alpha information too.
Yep. You can use alpha. There's a nice animation class that it's buried in the middle of some other stuff. I have to dig it out. But it's nice. It just automatically takes care of loading frames from a folder, and then you can just refer to it as an object, which we can get into that later. So here are the frames that I rendered out. So if you're going to be working with images, HD images, especially in processing, make sure you've assigned it tons of RAM in these preferences here. Like, essentially, I've found that if you give processing more than 512 megs of RAM and are exporting apps to Windows, because these memory settings, when you then export to Windows and Mac, I don't know about Linux. I'm not sure whether Linux does something more sophisticated with memory management. You don't need to tell it that it doesn't. You're saying?
And, this is up to the Java virtual machine, not Windows. Well, Oracle creates one for Windows, but the one for Mac was until recently done by Apple.
Right. Well, whatever the reason, all I know is you give an application more than 512 megs of RAM, it works fine on Mac. And this is when you export a finished application for processing. It gets crashy on Windows. That's just been my experience. So just basically, I'm about to crank this up because when you're working with big images and processing, remember they're all in there totally uncompressed. So like each HD image file is going to be like 6 megs in RAM. So if you're going to work big, if you're getting information out of these, you might want to render out smaller images and then render out keyframes for an HD file or something. All I'm saying is be aware that if I left this way and then went around and exported some file processing, no, we're running out of time, so force quit. So just for the sake of time, I'm going to cut most of these. I'm just going to give us 30 images here. One tip when you're rendering things out in After Effects, the number of hashes are the number of zeros you'll have. Generally, in processing, you only want one number because then you don't have to deal with what's called zero padding, which is the extra zeros in front of your numbers. So really quick, actually, just to make sure I show this, so everyone can see. What I was getting at was